Hello, my name is Jared, and I'm a part of KWOAK Consulting Group. Today, I'd like to ask you a question. How can Airbnb address the challenges of stakeholder capitalism to establish a sustainable profitability model? So what was Airbnb's problem fundamentally? Airbnb failed because it misapplied the stakeholder theory and conflated its business objectives. There was no true north catalyzing picking winners and losers of their stakeholders. Their pandemic response exacerbated stakeholder tensions, and they failed to capitalize on their unique value proposition in the gig economy during the pandemic crisis. Airbnb has opportunities to execute a balanced approach to stakeholder and shareholder philosophies, balance the demands of stakeholders and the trade-offs in the short term, and prioritize relationships in practice over stakeholders in theory, and unify stakeholders with incentives aligned with the broader financial goals of the enterprise. So first, I'd like to define stakeholder and shareholder theory. The stakeholder model, in essence, has many different objectives. It wants to serve each and every stakeholder within the enterprise. However, the issue here is that there's no unified objective between these stakeholders. So when there's a misalignment of interest with the stakeholders, such as we've seen in the stress test of the pandemic, we start to see the entire model falling apart because stakeholders, such as hosts, have differing interests to shareholders and guests. So what's missing and what can bring together these stakeholders to unify the business around a common goal? And what would a balanced approach between the stakeholder and shareholder model look like? I'll pass it over to Will.
Hi, so what can we learn from the failures of Airbnb in a pandemic? Airbnb largely failed to seize an incredible opportunity to assist a pandemic while also growing the company. By trying to appease all of their stakeholders and establishing a flawed set of principles, the company damaged relationships and hurt their standing with their community. However, despite these challenges, they are still set up well with a competitive advantage for a touchless hotel choice. But ultimately, they failed the hosts. And Taylor's going to talk to us about that.
Yes, thank you. So speaking of the hosts, we're hearing a lot of complaints from them about the cancellation fees. Hosts and guests are the bread and butter of Airbnb, and without them, the company doesn't exist. During shelter-in-place orders, guests stay home and don't travel. They save money rather than spend it. Your hosts have the exact opposite problem. Many of them rely on that extra income that comes from renting out their extra rooms on Airbnb. And without that, they're being hit extra hard by this unprecedented disaster. By telling hosts they have to refund all cancellation fees, you're adding insult to injury in a time where they're already absorbing a huge financial blow. Because of this, our first priority and option number one that we're proposing should be to restore trust with the hosts. And to do that, we're recommending a 20% executive salary pay cut to cover those cancellation fees. A lot of trust has been destroyed with how the pandemic has been handled so far, and your hosts and shareholders need to see decisive moves. By sacrificing executive salary, it not only gives money back to your key partners, it shows that you're invested, and most importantly, that you're listening. This is a short-term solution to your most pressing pandemic needs right now. However, Amanda's going to show us how we can take it a step further and expand the total pandemic strategy.
Thank you, Taylor. KWOAK Consulting began our deep analysis of your current business model, as Jared and Will went over earlier, the stakeholder model. But we also took a deep look at your past 5 years of financial records. We sought to analyze possible effects from the pandemic on your current revenue streams. Taking the current predicted decreases in travelers and total market loss around the globe, we were able to forecast your ratio of predicted revenue loss at $33 million per month. Ouch. This prediction was based on our total market share of revenue currently for hotel and hospitality in the major regions where you operate worldwide. And then we were actually trying to predict how those losses would affect your revenue. We termed this solution as the budget and leadership change strategy. The key components meant announcing executive leadership change in order for us to help redefine a stakeholder model, one that would help you be better poised for success longer. The leadership change would encompass a pause on spending for R&D and current marketing campaigns. Appointing a new leader at the CEO level would allow us to brand your business model Airbnb differently and help set Airbnb up as the safe and most touchless pandemic travel solution worldwide. Upon modeling these budget changes and other soft costs, we calculated over the next year, these efforts would cost close to $3 million and slow your focus on rapid growth. While the positive sides are you would spend rather little to make these changes, and the changes are table stakes for maintaining success through a recession, the drawback to this solution methodology is most closely focused on it only cutting costs and slowing your growth model, which could ultimately be a huge risk, especially if the world is lucky enough to quickly recover from the pandemic. We were also unable to define what additional revenue might be predicted with this model, besides just a budgetary impact by reducing your spend on growth. So to that, Sam is going to present option number 3 for you. Sam?
Thanks, Amanda. So one of the important considerations is that unlike a lot of the legacy competitors in the travel and hospitality industry, Airbnb doesn't have direct access to capital. It goes through intermediaries, largely the superhosts. So what we'd like to do is align some of the additional incentives between stakeholders. So what we want to look at some of the data that's out there to start to predict, certain customer demand within markets where we think there are going to be some bigger opportunities. Then we want to match those opportunities with superhosts and investors. So in matching that opportunity, the opportunities between the two, we think that this will enable better access to capital markets for superhosts. So they're going to have, better profit, better profit margins. Then they're going to have more market share overall and higher growth rates. On the flip side, for the investors are going to have the ability to be more targeted in their growth opportunities, as well as more tailoring their exposure. So we're planning on doing the IPO towards the end of the year. This will also give them an opportunity to be in a different type of asset class. As far as the financial implications, this will improve the superhost growth in the long term. And then we also think this will increase supply, which will then bring more customers into the Airbnb environment, which we've found is a positive long-term aspect as we have a quite high retention rate. Next slide, please. So to do this, we want to begin with month 1, starting to look at going out in that data universe and finding out what is out there for insights. How do you define or predict which markets or even a property is going to do well? Is that first of all, is that possible? Assuming that is possible, we then want to roll this out on a small test on a limited time basis, invitation only. Then we want to, assuming that continues to be a success, we then want to roll out so that superhosts can apply to it, and then potentially put some marketing around it to increase both the interest from superhosts and from investors who might be interested in this. I'll turn it over to Will.
All right, so we're about done with our presentation. We want to leave you with a few highlights. Balancing our shareholder model will result in profitability. Prioritizing our relationships will benefit the company and increase success long-term. Positioning our advantage during this tenuous time allows us to increase our market share. And finding incentives to benefit all of us involved will help us maintain growth in this pandemic. Thank you for your time and happy travels.